Imagine you are standing outside a bank. People are lining up, everyone wants their money back. But there is not enough gold inside to give everyone. It is July 1914. The war has not yet started, but the banks are already dying. And then suddenly there is an announcement: war. And the same war that brings destruction brings the banks back to life. Was it just a coincidence or a plan? History books tell us that wars are started by the pride of kings, land disputes, or the clash of nations. But if we look behind the scenes, another story emerges. This story is about banks, those institutions that lend money, charge interest, and claim to run the economy. But when they themselves are caught in a crisis, they have only one option left: war. War is not just a game of guns and bullets. It is the reset button for the financial system. When banks start to fail, war gives them new life. Governments suspend laws, gold promises disappear, and unlimited money printing is justified. The public is told that this is all for national security, but in reality it is for the security of the banks. From 1870 to 1914, European banks quadrupled their deposits, but gold reserves only increased by 80%. It was a fraud. The banks promised that for every deposit gold could be given, but in reality there was not that much gold. In July 1914, the London Stock Exchange froze. 50 countries were simultaneously suffering from a banking crisis. Big capitalists began to withdraw their money. Banks were running out of cash. This was the moment when the whole system could collapse in a matter of days. And then on August 4, Britain declared war on Germany. The very next day, on August 5, the British government passed the Currency and Banknotes Act. This law did three things. 1. The gold standard was suspended. 2. Unlimited currency printing was allowed. 3. The government guaranteed the losses of banks. Not only that, Germany, France, and Russia also suspended the gold standard. Loan repayments were postponed. The bad loans of banks were converted into war bonds. Private losses were transferred to the public. Have you ever wondered how the banks come to life the day after the declaration of war? It's not just a coincidence, it's a formula. Crisis, right arrow, war, right arrow, rescue. And this formula has been used over and over again. Imagine you are an ordinary citizen. You have your life savings in a bank. In July 1914, you receive news that the bank is closing. You run, you stand in line, but the answer comes from within. The gold is gone. Your heart sinks. Then the next day the news comes in the newspaper. Britain has declared war on Germany. Suddenly the banks reopen. The government says, "Don't worry, everyone is safe." You feel relieved, but the fact is that your loss has now been transferred to the government's account. You will pay taxes, bear inflation, but the banks will be saved. This story is not just about 1914. It is about every war. World War II, Vietnam, Iraq. Each time the banks were in crisis, and each time the war saved them. The question is, today, when the banks are in crisis again, is the next war imminent? Think you are walking down a street in London or New York in 1939. The shops are empty, people are unemployed, the banks are closed. Everyone is saying that the depression is over, but the truth is that the crisis is still alive. And then suddenly the news comes: Germany has invaded Poland. The war has begun, and the same war that bathes the world in blood also gives new life to the banks. Is this just a coincidence or a planned reset? The stock market crash of 1929 shook the world. Millions of people lost their savings. Factories closed, property prices plummeted, and loans became unpayable. But the biggest problem was the sovereign bonds held by the banks. Germany, Italy, and Japan had borrowed billions of dollars after World War I. These loans were now unpayable. The banks had these bonds on their balance sheets as valuable assets, but in reality they were just pieces of paper. If the banks had shown them at their real value, they would have gone bankrupt. Imagine you are an ordinary American. Your house is already in debt to the bank. Your job has been lost in the Depression. You read the newspaper and see that Germany is not paying back its loans. You think, if Germany goes bankrupt, my bank will go bankrupt too. Who will my house go to then? Then suddenly the news comes: Germany has invaded Poland. Fear settles in your heart, but for the banks this news is a message of life. because now those same loans will be called enemy loans, and the government will convert them into war expenses. The worthless loans held by the banks were now converted into government bonds in the name of national security. The people paid the price through taxes and inflation, but the banks were clean. Did you notice when Germany was not paying back the loans, it was death for the banks? But when Germany became the enemy, the same loans were called war losses. The banks survived, the people died. All this happened while millions of people were dying in the war, but the bankers were building the empire of the future. Imagine a soldier is fighting on the French front. He has a gun in his hand and he is wondering when this war will end. But at the same time, thousands of miles away in a conference room, bankers in suits are sitting. They are deciding who will have the world's money after the war. The soldier is giving blood, yes, the bankers are taking power. World War II saved the banks from the Great Depression. Bad loans were wiped out, new bonds were issued, and the public paid the price. The banks became more powerful than ever. What does this story tell us? That wars are not just about land or politics, they are about banks. And the next time you read in a history book that Germany invaded Poland, remember, there was another war behind that invasion, a war to save the banks. Imagine you are in 1965. The most powerful country in the world, the United States, has promised that for every dollar you spend you will get gold, $35 per ounce. But the truth is that the United States is printing so many dollars that it does not have that much gold. This is a fraud, and the fraud is about to be exposed. France took the first step, asking for gold in exchange for dollars. If the rest of the world does the same, the dollar will disappear in a few years. And then suddenly a war begins. Vietnam, the same war that takes millions of lives, gives new life to the banks. The Bretton Woods system was created in 1944. Under it, currencies around the world were tied to the dollar and the dollar to gold. The United States had promised that for every dollar, it would give $35 per ounce of gold. But in the 1960s, the United States printed so many dollars that it became impossible to fulfill this promise. French President Charles de Gaulle was the first to recognize the truth. In 1965, France asked for $750 million in gold and took back a shipload of gold. Other countries followed suit. If this had continued, the United States would have run out of gold and the dollar would have collapsed. Imagine you are an ordinary American. Your salary is in dollars, your savings are in dollars. You have been assured that it is the strongest currency in the world. But then you hear that France has asked for gold in exchange for dollars. You think, if everyone did this, my dollar would become a piece of paper. At that moment, the government announces, "We are going to war in Vietnam." The question arises in your mind, why do we have to go there? But for the banks, this announcement is a message of life, because war means the justification for printing unlimited dollars. Have you considered when France asked for gold, it was death for the United States? But when the war began in Vietnam, that death turned into life. The war kept the dollar alive for another 6 years. The Vietnam War delayed the collapse of Bretton Woods. If the system had collapsed in 1965, the banks would have gone bankrupt, but the war bought them time. In 1971, President Nixon closed the gold window. The dollar was no longer tied to gold, but the banks were ready. They had adjusted their balance sheets to the new system. Imagine an American soldier fighting in the jungles of Vietnam. Soaking in the rain under gunfire, he is thinking, "Why am I here?" But thousands of miles away in the banks of New York, the men in suits are happy, because the soldier's sacrifice has bought them time. Time to save their debts, time to prepare for the new financial system. In 1973, the United States made a deal with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia promised to sell its oil only in dollars. In return, the United States promised military protection and loans. Thus, the power of the dollar was tied to oil, not gold. The world needed dollars to buy oil. For the banks, it was a new empire. Now they knew that the dollar would never run out because every country needed oil. The Vietnam War saved not just one country, but the entire financial system. It took millions of lives, but it gave new life to the banks. And the next time you see pictures of Vietnam, remember, this war was not just about politics or communism. It was about saving the dollar. Think the most powerful financial system in the world is hanging by a thread. This thread is, oil should be sold only in dollars. If this thread breaks, the dollar will fall to the ground, and so will the banks. And then one man declares, I will sell oil not in dollars but in another currency. This man was Saddam Hussein. And what happened after that declaration is the greatest lesson of history. Whoever challenges the petrodollar will end up in war. In the 1970s, the United States made a deal with Saudi Arabia that oil would be sold only in dollars. This deal tied the dollar to oil instead of gold. The world needed dollars to buy oil, and so banks were convinced that the dollar would never run out. But in 1990, Saddam Hussein challenged this system. Iraq had one of the world's largest oil reserves. If Iraq had sold its oil in another currency instead of dollars, the rest of OPEC could have done the same. That would have eliminated the demand for dollars, and the bank's billions of dollars in debt would have been wiped out. Imagine you're an ordinary American. You work for a company that relies on bank loans. You've been told that the dollar is the strongest currency in the world. But then you hear Iraq say, we'll sell our oil in euros. You think, if that happens, my dollar will be a piece of paper. At that moment, the news comes on TV. Iraq has invaded Kuwait. The United States is sending troops. You're told that this is a war for freedom and justice, but the truth is, this is a war for the dollar. The petrodollar is safe. Iraq was no longer able to sell oil, and the rest of the world continued to sell oil in dollars. Did you notice? Iraq said one thing, we will sell oil in euros. And after that, the whole world saw war. This war was not about oil, this war was about money. In 2000, Iraq announced that it would sell oil in euros. This announcement was a bombshell for the United States. If Iraq had succeeded, other countries would have also started selling oil in euros or other currencies. The demand for dollars would have disappeared, and billions of dollars in bank loans would have failed. On March 20, 2003, the United States invaded Iraq. The official reason was weapons of mass destruction, but no weapons were found. The real reason was that Iraq challenged the petrodollar. In June 2003, Iraq's oil sales resumed in dollars. The central bank was brought under American supervision. The petrodollar was safe. Imagine an ordinary Iraqi citizen. His house was destroyed in the war. His family was displaced. He thinks, why was this war fought? He is told that it is against terrorism. But the truth is that this war was to sell his country's oil in dollars. In 2011, Muammar Gaddafi announced that gold dinar will be created. Africa's oil and gold will be sold in this currency. This was another threat to the petrodollar. In March 2011, NATO invaded Libya. Gaddafi was killed, his plan was thwarted, and Libyan oil was once again sold in dollars. Syria also tried to move away from the dollar. In 2011, Syria plunged into civil war. Iran repeatedly tried to sell oil in other currencies, but it was hit by severe sanctions. The biggest lie in history is that wars are fought for nations. The truth is that wars are fought for banks, and until the public understands this pattern, this machine will keep running. The banks will keep saving, the public will keep paying the price. The question is not if there will be a war, the question is when and where, but one thing is certain, war always saves the banks.